Hi, welcome to the Global Grid Experience. You're here listening. I'm so grateful. I'm Erica, your host. Do you ever wonder why change for the good is so dang slow, but the bad kind of change is like rapid fire? I constantly do, to the point it can drive me batty. Today's guest, Dr. Karen Branden, is going to give us a bit of an inside look from a sociologist perspective on why we, in a sense, are letting some crazy shit happen to the environment, how we can work with others, and that it's not always about playing nicey-nice. Dr. Karen Branden has a PhD in sociology and has been a professor of sociology for over 20 years. She's taught at schools around the world and is currently a professor of sociology and criminal justice at Minnesota State University Moorhead. One of the classes she teaches that really piqued my interest is Society and the Environment. Karen's joining us from her home in Rochert, Minnesota. Hi, Karen. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you, Armigwich. I'm excited to be here. This is really fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Let's dive right in. But first of all, can you explain what sociology is?
Sure. Sociology is the study of group behavior and group interaction. So it's pretty much anytime people are doing things together, sociologists are probably studying it.
Okay. So you teach society and the environment. How do they relate to each other, and what are you seeing as the current trend?
Society and the environment is that open loop system, right? It's anything we do to the environment impacts us. And then that impact on us actually links back into what's going on with the environment. So if we use up all of a resource, right, then we have to find another resource. If we put something toxic into the soil or the water, that gets into our bodies and we have health concerns. So, the society and environment class is more of an interdisciplinary approach because you kind of have to understand a little bit about ecosystems and the physical environment and social systems and how those two things come together. The most important thing about how people come into contact with the environment, as everybody knows, is we need the environment to survive, right? We need food, water, air, shelter, and we get all of that from our environment. So anything we do to the environment could potentially impact our ability to survive.
When we were talking earlier, you told me that you discussed the concept of risk with your students when it comes to climate change and belief systems. Can you explain that to our audiences? I thought that was so interesting.
Sure. Well, I think there's a tendency for people to, first of all, see ourselves as not problematic for the environment because most of us, and I believe most people, are not walking around trying to create harm, whether it be to other people or to the environment. There's a small handful of people who actually are that way, but most people are not. And so when we talk about what's risky in relation to behavior, people have that tendency to individualize it and not see this system that we're part of. And so when we talk about things that are difficult for people to, one, understand and two, sometimes to believe, like climate change, risk becomes a real important question because if you say climate change isn't real and nothing's going on, there's a risk associated with that, right? If there is climate change, and I ask students that, I say, well, what's the risk if you're wrong? Because that's how we really want to consider questions about the environment is what are we risking if we're wrong? And so the students kind of have to ponder that and spend some time. Well, if we're wrong, then we're actually risking quite a bit. So then we look at the flip side and we say, okay, so if we believe that there's climate change and we want to make changes, what's the risk if we're wrong? And when students weigh out those risks, they realize that the risks are much heavier related to if we do nothing or continue to contribute to climate change, we're risking a lot versus if we create local energy sources, more sustainable energy sources that our local people can be paid to run and care for example, we're running a low risk. And so we try to do that with each topic. We kind of put it up into a systems understanding and say, what are we risking if we do nothing or if we do something? And we even look at risk, to be fair, when we look at renewable energy. What are we risking if we use renewable energy? Are there some risks there? So we spend a lot of time thinking about risk because I think we have this tendency to equate everything sort of even risk, equal risk. And like people will say things like, there's toxins in everything. Yeah, but aren't you curious about which things are less toxic? Especially when people have children, they become interested in that, right? Which things are less toxic? Because some things are more toxic and some things are less toxic. So what are we risking, right? So kind of getting them into thinking about how systems work, what they're risking for us and the future of our families and communities, and then where they want to be with that. I ask them, is this worth risking your future? Because they're young and I'm interested in their futures.
It's hard to talk to people about tough issues like the environment and climate change, and what I feel, and I know many people feel, is critical and an urgent situation and challenge. Why is that hard to talk to people?
Well, first of all, I think it's hard to talk to people because people live pretty decent lives, right? I mean, especially around here, people work really hard. I know a lot of people who are working two jobs to make everything work for their families. They're busy with children, they're busy with life, and they're busy being good people in general. And so when somebody comes along and says, turns out that your behavior is destroying the environment, that's really hard for people to swallow because one, they don't see the impact immediately around them. It's a slow process. Climate change is a slow process. It's not like weather. Weather's instantaneous. Weather, we can talk about what happened today with the weather. But what happened today with climate change, that's not really scientifically a relevant conversation because climate change takes, you have to wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years before you can start to say, yeah, the climate is shifting. And so people don't see it and they don't really feel it because it's this slow process. So good people and slow process means that people can look around and say, I don't really see anything going on here. And now you're here trying to tell me I'm a bad person. So people think when we come in the room and say, hey, we're trashing the environment, that we're blaming people, pointing fingers and saying that they're bad people. And so I think there's that immediate defense mechanism. And also people don't want to feel like, oh, I have been trashing the environment unknowingly for a long time. And people feel bad about that. So I think it's easier to say, I don't see a problem. We've got leaders who talk about there not being a problem. Nobody else in my community is panicking. So why should I panic? Right? Because we are very social creatures. So, if we run experiments, it's amazing what happens when you put people into groups. They become slower at dealing with emergencies. Isn't that interesting? You put people into a group, they get slower at dealing with emergencies unless they've been trained not to do so, which is why we have things like first responders. So if you put one person into a room for an experiment and you say, hey, we're going to put you in this room, we're going to do this paperwork. And we, of course, don't tell them what we're studying. We say we're studying human behavior and we'll be back to start the experiment. But really, the experiment is going to be what happens to these people when we indicate an emergency as they're filling out the paperwork. And so an emergency happens, somebody in the hallway is yelling, help, help, help. And if there's one person in a room, it takes them seconds, literally. They kind of listen, they get up and they go check. They open the door and they go check. They heard somebody. We'll have an experimenter outside saying, oh, can I help you? And they say, well, I thought I heard somebody yell help. Oh, yeah, everything's fine. Right? And what we're doing is we're timing. How long does it take them to get out into that hallway? You put two people in there, it takes them minutes to get out in the hallway. You put 3 and 4 people in there, and now you have to actually have the help that was yelled the first time. It's a recording, right? So we have the same conditions each time we do it. But after a certain period of time, say 5 minutes, we have the tape run again or the recording run again and say, help, help. So you start getting 3, 4, 5 people in there, you're having to continue to yell help. because it takes them so long to get out the door. So we know through experiments like this time and time again, and through actual video footage of emergency situations, that people really move as groups. And we're taught that we're very individual. And so we don't always understand and catch that we're moving as a group. So if the group isn't freaking out, we're usually not freaking out, right?
Do you have any suggestions for having more meaningful conversations that can help convey the urgency when, like you were saying, as a group, we're slow moving?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is with that slow moving piece, it's like muscle memory, right? You have these athletes will train. I'm going to hit this ball 100 times this way in front of my coach because my coach is going to make sure my whole body's lined up so that when I hit it without thinking, I have muscle memory. Well, our brains work this way as well. And our brains work that way with social interaction. So we learn how to socially interact in our culture when we're very young. So that when we're moving around interacting most of our day, we don't really have to pay attention to. Our brain is very skilled. So if you use driving home, like we'll be driving home and we get home and we're like, I don't even remember driving home. And it's not because we're drunk or on drugs, right? It's because our brain was like, oh, we got muscle memory. We don't have to focus because we're driving home. So we've done this how many times? So our bodies do this. Our body has muscle memory. Our brain has muscle memory. So one of the things about having conversations is to get people out of that sort of muscle memory space, but not put them into a defensive space. And so that's the real artistic trick of how do we come to people and have these conversations in a way that they'll absorb and remember, but also in a way that doesn't make them feel horrible and defensive. And so I always like to meet a group kind of where they are. So if I'm talking to a local group, I was talking to a local group, and I grew up in Minnesota. I'm a Minnesota woman. You know, I spent my whole life here and grew up fishing, hunting, hiking, skiing, you know, the whole deal. So when I talk to a local group, one of the first things I ask is, has anybody been out fishing? How's the fishing, right? Because walleye is the best fish in the world. So I'm very interested in catching some walleye. And so when I meet this group, I'm like, I'm a Minnesotan too. We're all from the same culture, so I'm interested in fishing. But I also know that we have a problem, right? We have a problem with our lakes. We have chemicals in our lakes that prevent us from eating fish. If you look online, the DNR and other organizations will tell you how many fish you can eat out of a lake. And so I'll ask people, hey, how's the fishing? Because even in the winter we fish here, we put up little houses and fish, right? So we fish year round. It doesn't matter how cold it gets. And people will say, I heard they're catching, over on Big Detroit Lake. And I'm like, well, how many fish can you eat out of there? And usually there's one or two people in the room who say, well, you're only supposed to eat one or two fish out of there. And people will kind of look around like, what do you mean you're only supposed to eat one or two fish? And then we'll talk about, well, yeah, there's from burning coal, we get all sorts of air pollution, but when it rains, that comes into the lakes and then it affects what those fish have in them, right? And then we absorb that when we eat it. So how many fish can we have? And if you're pregnant, how many fish can you have? And so then people get real interested in it, right? They're like, oh, and then it's like, so here we've just had a conversation about coal and coal pollution. And it was in their mind didn't create defensiveness because they want to know, are they harming their family if they're eating too many fish? So if you start from people's life experience, life rhythms, right? Like, hey, we're all going around eating fish, and then people will come up with stories like, well, my friend's daughter got this, my friend's son has that, my friend has this, my friend has that, these illnesses. And they're directly linked into types of coal pollution. And so here we've just had a climate change conversation, right? But we had it on the local level and we had it about their life and what matters in their life. And we brought it to the real space of there are some issues in our communities. We don't have to talk about climate change. We don't have to talk about these bigger, broader global issues in order to deal with and understand that these issues are happening here. And just because people aren't panicking doesn't mean they shouldn't be paying more attention to how this is actually affecting them.
I keep forgetting to reach people on the what do you have in common level because I come in with the, oh my gosh, this is so critical. And then I tend to turn people off. So that's
Well,
why.
it's hard because, well, once you know Like, that's the part of critical thinking. Once you become a critical thinker, nobody can take that away from you. And sometimes it's a problem because it's harder to compartmentalize, it's harder to separate. And so once you know that big picture, it is a bit horrifying. It's scary because the changes that are happening in our ecosystems and in our environment, they're happening faster than scientists thought. That's the number one way that climate scientists and scientists who deal with environmental issues, the number one ways that they've been incorrect is how intense and how quickly it's happening. And so once you're there, you want to go around and tell people the sky is literally falling, like literally, y'all, the sky is falling. But people can't hear that.
It's so frustrating knowing that this is so critical and yet having to what feels a lot of times like delicately walk around it with people so that you don't offend them. And so the balance between this is critical and urgent and also having to be super nicey-nice and to keep them comfortable so they don't shut you out is so frustrating. I just want to be like, you guys, this is serious. Look outside. We haven't had hardly
Yeah.
any snow. Temperatures are higher. I mean, you can see it. You don't need to have
Yeah.
science. You can see with your own eyes. So wake up and do something. And people just feel, to me, a lot of people just asleep and like you said, maybe the group mentality. Somebody else will deal with it.
I think it is partially that group mentality. And I think it's partially that, people don't want to admit that it's really happening. I mean, it's a pretty harsh reality to have to admit to. And it means a lot of changes in our lives. People think, oh, I'm going to have to recycle more and buy an electric vehicle and buy solar and it's like, no, really what you have to do is you can do all those things. It's important as individuals that we look at our impact and we take responsibility for that. And I think that's the hard part for people is having to take responsibility and be held accountable for what they're actually doing. And since people generally are good people, that's a hard pill to swallow. And if they've been convinced that it's phony and that they're trying to be manipulated, right, then they will not be manipulated. And sometimes you can't be nice, right? Sometimes it's not about being nice. It's about, I'm going to err on the side of getting this information to this group of people, whether it offends them or not. And there are times when I'm talking with a group and I get a lot of pushback and I say, okay, I'm going to inform you of all these things. And now you know. So you cannot say you did not know. You have to say, I didn't agree. I didn't understand. I didn't think it was true. But I did know I was informed because there's always somebody in the room who's already leaning in that direction. And all they really need to move forward is somebody else in the room to say, yeah, that's not how it works. That's unfortunately not how it works. We're living in a finite planet with finite resources, and we cannot use a linear system that assumes infinite resources, infinite planet, right? And so sometimes you have to throw down and hold that line and push back and say, your feelings matter. You know what? So do mine. My feelings matter too. And I get to have my feelings, and I also get to have my scientific information laid on the table. And so sometimes I get a little bit vicious. I'll ask somebody, how long have you been working in this field? And they'll be like, oh, I don't work in this field. Okay, so how long have you been reading in this field? Oh, so where did you get your information? And one of the things I always ask groups is, I don't come in here with politics. I come in here with scientific information about the environment. It feels political because politics has told you to feel that way about it. But we're going to all have to take off our political lenses. So I'm not coming at you with politics. I'm coming at you with scientific information. And I'm asking you to take off your political lenses because I think you should be looking at my material with a scientific lens, not a political one. And that sort of changes the room because then where did you get your information becomes really powerful, right? Where did you get that information? Because I'm going to investigate it. I'm interested in it. I'm curious about it. I want to make sure that's science and not politics. So you can't always be nice. It's an outright fight. And I would say that fighting for a planet that allows us to survive in such a beautiful way. I mean, this is a beautiful planet. It is incredible. And fighting for that, if you have to sometimes throw down, so be it. So be it. Sometimes we have to get a little rough. Sometimes we have to use tough love, right? Sometimes we have to say, you don't like this, you don't want to hear this, but my voice matters, and this is what I have to say. Try to find a way to mitigate any negative impact you're doing, because we're all going to do some sort of impact on the environment. And that's unavoidable, right? But I always tell people, make changes in individual life and share them with your friends and family, and then demand changes in your community. Elect leaders in your community that are more interested in protecting the ecosystems of your community and using them in good ways. I always tell people to look at who you're voting in, the community level, the state level, and the regional level, national level, who we vote in, and whether or not they'll listen to this and help us do this is really the big places to change. And then investigate what you're buying and using, and put your money where your mouth is, sort of buy products that you know aren't harming the environment.
This has been wonderful, just like I knew it would be. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
I would say lead with curiosity and take care of yourself and others.
I love that.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. This was wonderful, and I love what you're doing. It's really important.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for joining, and I hope we have you on again.
Oh, I hope so too. Anytime. Take care and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. That was Dr. Karen Branden from Rochert, Minnesota. I love her grit. Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for listening and being a part of the Global Grit experience. Don't be afraid to be the person who speaks up and shows up, even if others aren't. It's easier to sit with yourself that way, and you're really not alone. There are a lot of us out here with grit, passion, and perseverance, and an unwavering dedication to protecting nature and the outdoor places we love. Thank you again for listening and being a good soul out there. I so appreciate it. Talk soon.